students. In the last video, I told you about the ossification of a long bone. And in this video, I'm going to tell you some of the important questions which must be arising in your mind. And these questions are usually asked as short note. So just to understand the whole process of ossification or the bone formation, you will have to find the answer of this question. So I'm now moving to the next slide where these questions are asked. Well, these are the questions and I will try to provide the answers of this question. As I said that most of these are asked as the short note in the examination. Let us come to the first question. How a developing bone increases in length and diameter? And this I have already covered while I was teaching you in the last video about the ossification in a long bone. But I will also again repeat it, okay, at some length. Second question which we will deal is how long a developing bone will grow after birth. Okay, you have seen in the last video that the primary center of ossification in long bones of limbs usually appears at the 8th week of intrauterine life, and then it forms the diaphyseal part of the bone, and then after the birth, okay, then the centers for the ends, that is for the epiphyseal ends of the bone, they appear and they form, okay, and this keep on growing, and we will see how this ultimately the growth of the bone at the epiphyseal and diaphyseal center or primary and secondary center will ultimately cease or stop, and what are the factors which leads to this completion of the ossification. Then in the third question, what is the growing end of a long bone? And I will answer what is the growing end of a long bone, because it has some clinical significance. Now, then lastly, I will try to answer what are different types of the epiphyses. When I was a student, this was a very hot short note. Okay, usually asked in the examination, the different types of epiphyses. Now, in the next slide, I will move how a developing bone increases in length and diameter. Okay, so I'm moving to the next slide. Now in this slide, you can see the question is how a developing bone increases in length and then diameter. Okay. Now this is just see here, I will put the pointer at the epiphyseal plate. Now this is the epiphyseal plate which is interposed or placed between the bone forming by epiphyseal center, the spongy bone at the end, and this is the diaphyseal bone which is formed by the primary center. This is that epiphyseal bone. The length of a bone grows because of the growth in this epiphyseal plate. Okay, so that epiphyseal plate is very important for the growth of the bone in the length of the bones, right? Now formation of new cartilages always takes place on the epiphyseal side of this epiphyseal side of this epiphyseal plate. See, this is the epiphysis, okay, or the bones at the end which has developed from secondary center, and this is that side of the epiphyseal plate which is facing towards the epiphysis. Okay, now this surface of the cartilage, okay, of the epiphyseal plate, okay, is divided into many layers, as you must have already learned about it. This is the zone of the resting cartilage, then there comes the zone of the proliferating cartilage, and then the zone of the hypertrophied cartilage, and then ultimately the last zone in the epiphyseal plate is the zone of the calcified cartilage. Okay, so on this surface towards the epiphyseal surface, okay, this cartilage is multiplying, the cell chondrocyte are multiplying and increasing towards the end. But on the other hand, where there is the calcified cartilage is there, which is facing towards the metaphysis or towards the diaphyseal end of the metaphysis, Since you can see here that this calcified cartilage, on the surface of this calcified cartilage, new bone is laid down. So the metaphysis is an active side of the bone formation. So the growth takes place on epiphyseal side, and it is the cartilage is ultimately replaced by the bones on the metaphyseal side. In this way, the length of the bone grows at both the ends, okay, on the upper end of the long bone as well as the lower end. So this fact is important, that is the growth in the cartilaginous plate, epiphyseal plate, which is responsible for the growth of the long bone. Now then question comes, how the growth in the diameter of the bone takes place, because if you will see in a newborn or in the child of 1 year or 2 years old, the diameter of this long bones and other bones also keeps on increasing, and this is by the formation of the new bone deep to the periosteum. You already know that the bones are covered by the membrane called as the periosteum, and deep to this periosteum there is the new bone formation taking place, okay, during the process of the ossification. So these are the two important process by which the length grows. Length grows by the epiphyseal cartilage growth, and the second, the diameter of the bone, it grows by the formation of the new bone deep to the periosteum. And as I have told you in the last video that whatsoever bone is formed deep to the periosteum, it is by the method of intramembranous ossification, while the ends of the bones, they grow through the epiphyseal plate, it is by the method of endochondral ossification. Now after this question, we are moving to the next question. Now, this is another question here, how long a developing bone will grow after birth. As we have seen that after birth, okay, soon after birth, there is one primary center and ends are still cartilaginous. And soon after the birth, then at the different ages, the secondary centers will appear for both the ends, okay. And then these centers will also develop the bone, okay. And then question come, and this keeps on growing. The bone in this way by diameter and length, it will keep on growing. But then question come, how long this growth will take place, okay? Now there is a fixed time for every bone to cease the ossification or the growth. That is between 16 to 20 years of age, the proliferation of this epiphyseal cartilage cells, okay, will cease, okay? So the epiphyseal plate proliferation will slows and finally ceases, okay. So and ultimately this epiphyseal plate, okay, which was responsible for the growth in the length of the bone, will be replaced by the bone itself. So no more now the epiphyseal plate will be available for the growth in the length, okay. Thus the cartilage of epiphyseal plate is also replaced by bone, okay. Okay, the epiphysis and the diaphysis now will fuse as soon as this epiphyseal plate is replaced by bone, so that the center of the primary center, the diaphysis bone, and the bone which is formed by secondary center, the epiphysis, they will come and fuse with each other. And the fusion where will take place, the fusion between the epiphysis and diaphysis will take place at a line which can be seen in adult bone, that is called as the epiphyseal line, okay. Once the epiphyseal line has appeared, that means fusion has taken place between the epiphysis and diaphysis, that means between the primary center and secondary center bone, then there will be no further growth in the length, okay. The time of this fusion varies from bone to bone. You must have noticed that some bone, it fuses, epiphysis and diaphysis, they fuses between the 16 years, and in some bone it can grow as long as 25 years of the age, as we have seen in the case of the clavicle, okay. So these are the different times by which the two centers, epiphyseal and diaphyseal center, they will fuse with each other, okay. Let's go to the next slide where we will see and another question is here, what is the growing end of a long bone? Okay. Now, this is an important question. I will tell you its applied importance. In a long bone, the secondary center for upper and lower end, that means which develops at the ends of the long bones, epiphyseal centers, okay, they appear at different times after birth, okay, because the primary center is the only center which appears before birth. Secondary center, they appear usually after the birth, okay, and these centers, they unite with the diaphysis also at variable time. That means for if one end the center appears in first year, then for the other end the center will appear say somewhere between on the second year, third year or fifth year. So there is variable time of appearance of these secondary centers. Okay. Now this secondary center which appears at variable time, they will also fuse with the primary center or diaphysis also at the variable time. So the center which had appear at the first year of age will fuse say somewhere 20 years of age, and then the center which has appeared for the opposite hand by third year may fuse somewhere 16 or 17 years. So these are the variable time of appearance as well as their fusion. Okay, so there is a rule. Okay, there is a rule which is called as the rule of the growing end, and according to this rule, the secondary center which appear first, okay, for any end, whether it is the upper end or lower end or any other end in the irregular bone also, not if even if it is not a long bone, okay, the secondary center which appears first, it will unite last, okay, with the diaphysis. So the one which appear first will have to unite last, okay. This end of the long bone is called as the growing end, that end which has appeared first and has united last. In the next slide, I will give you an example and will show you. Now, at the growing end, the length of the growth occurs for a longer period of time. Okay, so naturally, because it has appeared first and it is uniting last, so that means there is an extra time is given to this end, and at this end, the growth is taking place for a longer time compared to that of the opposite side. If you have not followed, I am sure you will follow this fact and the rule of the appearance in the next slide. I am moving to the next slide where on the basis of illustration I will show you this. Right. So moving to the next slide. Now see here, these are the three diagrams in which I will show you the growing end of a long bone. Now see, this is a bone. Here the bone which is formed is by the primary center which has appeared, okay, in the intrauterine life, and this is the diaphysis. And both the ends to begin with, they were cartilaginous and the birth has taken place. Now, after the birth, then a center appears here for the, say for example, it is the upper end of the long bone, and here a secondary center appears at the second year of the age, okay, when child is 2 years of age or has completed 1 year or 1.5 years. So during the second year it has appeared, and then another center here for the opposite end has, say for example, third year or fourth year, okay. So which is the first center to appear, secondary center? It is for the upper end, okay, it is for the upper end. Now this center which had appeared at the third year of the age of a child now will you fuse, because it was after the appearance of the center for the upper end. So upper end center was the first to appear. So the center which appeared at the third year of age will fuse first with the diaphysis. Say for example, it has fused at the age of 70 years. So now this end, the lower end will no longer grow. But At the same time, growth is still taking place at the upper end because this center, primary center, has not fused with the secondary center, and the epiphyseal plate which is present here is still forming the new cartilage, and at the metaphyseal side, okay, this is constantly being replaced by the bone, so bone is still growing in the length on this end. Okay, now then this center will also fuse. Say for example, it has fused at the age of the 19 years. So this center which appeared first while the second year of age has a fuse at the age of 19 year, which is later than the 17 years. Okay, so the rule was that the center which appear first for the ends, okay, by the secondary centers, they fuse also at the last. Okay, so that end of the bone where center has appeared first and fuse at the last is also called as the growing end of a long bone, the growing end of the long bone. Let us go to the next slide where we will see another fact about this growing end of the long bone. So I am moving to the next slide. Now see here in this slide, what we have seen that the nutrient foramina in the shaft of the long bone, which is in diaphysis, okay, somewhere in the middle of the shaft, is always directed opposite to the growing end. See this end was the growing end, upper end was the growing end, because the center, secondary center appeared here in a child at the second year of age and fused at the 20-year age. So this end is growing end. But if you will see the nutrient foramina in a dry bone, the nutrient foramina will have some direction, and in this bones the direction of the nutrient foramina is always opposite to the growing end. Say for example, here the upper end was the growing end, hence here the nutrient foramina is directed towards the lower end, which is not the growing end, which is not the growing end. So this is a general rule. So there are two rules. Now one said that the secondary center which will appear first will unite last. This was the first rule. Second rule, which is here, that it is the nutrient foramina, not rule but an observation, is that the nutrient foramina is always directed opposite to the growing end. So just by seeing a dry bone and its direction of the nutrient foramina, you can tell which end of the bone is the growing end. An exception to this observation that it is always directed opposite to the growing end is only one bone in the body, long bone, fibula. Otherwise, it is always directed to the growing end. Now here, the growing end in upper limb are away from the elbow. If you see the long bones of upper limb and lower limb, then there is another observation is that growing head in the upper limb, that means humerus, radius and ulna, they are away from the elbow. What does it mean? It means that the upper end of the humerus is the growing end, okay, because it is away from elbow, and then the lower end of the ulna and radius, they are also the growing end, because it says that growing end in upper limb, they are away from the elbow, but opposite is the case in the lower limb. So there is femur, tibia and fibula. Here the growing end is the lower end of the femur and the lower end of the tibia and fibula. Okay, tibia and fibula. So here the lower, that means here in lower limbs they are towards the knee. Okay, I'm sorry. They are towards the knee for tibia and fibula. I'm sorry. The lower limb, it is just opposite. That means the center, growing end, they are towards the upper end of the tibia and fibula and the lower end of the femur and the lower end of the femur. And here in the upper limbs, the growing end is away from the elbow. Okay, away from the elbow. That means upper end of the humerus and lower end of the radius and lower end of the radius. And once again I will repeat for lower limb. Okay, it is the lower end of the femur which is the growing end, and it is the upper end of the radius, tibia and fibula. Okay, they are the growing end. Okay, they are the growing end. Now, what is the applied importance? Why should one know the growing end, especially in the long bones? Say, for example, okay, because of the some problem, if a child is brought to you and if, then you are in position, I will say you are forced to ampute the upper limb. Okay, that means from the arm. Okay, arm has to be amputated. That means you will cut the humerus. Okay, uh, in a young child. Okay, who is still 6, 7, 8 years old. And then when you are amputating the arm, then you should know what is the growing end of this bone to which I am cutting. Okay, because in case of humerus, since the upper end is the growing end, that means it will keep on growing till the age is achieved, and age is achieved means by the 18 or 19 years it will keep on growing. Okay, so that fact should be in your mind. And since the upper end of the humerus is the growing end, it will keep on growing, so the stump of the humerus should be such that, and it should be covered by the soft tissue muscles and skin such that this growing end of the humerus should not penetrate the skin. So enough length of the muscles and the skin you should leave while suturing after amputation, so that it will not. Otherwise, if you will suture the skin very close to the amputated end of the humerus, after some time the growing end will start penetrating the skin. Okay, that is the applied importance. So at the time of amputation, where the ossification has yet not completed, you have to take the care. Okay, you have to take this care. Now moving to the next slide. Now, then coming to the last question, what are different types of the epiphyses? Okay, epiphyses are the ends of the bone in a case of a long bone, or they are at various places in the other types of the bones. Okay, say regular bones, I would say hip bone, then in scapula, the flat bone, or other bones, miniature long bones. Then epiphyses, okay, in long bones they are the end, at the ends, but it may be anywhere in the bone at other places. Now we just talk here uh, what are different types of epiphyses. Epiphyses in long bones, they are at the ends, okay, upper end and the lower end. But epiphyses in the other bones, okay, beside the ends, they may be at some other places. And formation of these epiphyses in the bones depend on the sum of the factors, okay, which are the forces which are acting onto the bones. They will lead to the formation of the epiphyses. And what is epiphyses? It is nothing but the bone which has developed from the secondary center. That means the center of the ossification, secondary center of ossification, have to appear on the basis of some of these factors, and that's why there are the different kind of the epiphyses. We will know. Let us see what are the different types. Epiphyses are bone which develops from secondary center of ossification. I have already told you their appearance depend upon the type of force acting on them. That I have also told you. For example, epiphysis of long bone of the limb raises the load. Okay, limbs. That means if you are standing, your femur, tibia, and fibula, it is resisting the load, and load is a compressive force. While epiphyses in the other bones are subjected to the traction forces. For example, where strong muscles are pulling onto the bone, even on long bones where strong muscles are attached, they will pull that bone. Okay, that means they will just produce the tensile forces, and it is the traction on that. Okay, on the death. So epiphyseal bones are three types. Okay, it is the pressure where compressive forces or the load is applied, they are pressure epiphyses. Then where the pulling force is applied onto the bone, there the secondary center of the ossification will develop, and that is the traction kind of epiphysis. And lastly, I will tell you about an epiphysis which are story of which can be traced on the process of evolution, that are the atavistic. I will explain you what are the atavistic epiphyses. So we have learned that there are three types of the epiphyses. Let's move to the next slide. Now, these three types of the epiphyses are: number one, pressure epiphyses. Okay, in this diagram, you can see this the end of a long bone. This is the femur, and its end is the develops as a secondary center because of the pressure. Okay, because so this is pressure epiphysis, and it is present at the end of the long bone, and thus since the ends of the bones they articulate with the other bones, so they are articular. So pressure epiphyses are always articular in nature because they develop. Articular means they form a joint with the opposite bone. Okay, they will form. So these bones, they are long bones, ends are always articular, or the bones which will form the joints, ends will form. So this kind of the bones which have developed from the pressure, they are called as the pressure epiphyses, okay, at the ends. Now this epiphysis is subjected to pressure, that is the load bearing, as I told you, in the femur, ends of femur, upper end, lower end, and the tibia, they are the subjected to the pressure, okay. And these epiphyses, not only this, they transmit the load or the pressure, but at the same time they also protect the cartilage. Which cartilage? Epiphyseal cartilage, because this epiphyseal plate of cartilage is placed between epiphyses and the diaphyses, okay, the centers developing from secondary and the primary center respectively. Now these example of the pressure epiphyses are the long bones in limbs. So the upper end of the humerus, lower end of the humerus, of the femur, of the tibia, of the ulna and radius, all the upper ends, they are the example where secondary centers develops at the end. They are the example of the pressure epiphyses. Then another epiphyseal center or secondary center may develop, okay, where muscles are attached, and they are the traction epiphyses because it is produced due to the pull of the muscle, okay. Thus they are non-articular, because I said that the ends of the bones were articular because they were I'm just say passing the loads or pressure, but here it is traction, it is pull, it is just opposite the force, okay. And here also the secondary center of ossification will appear, and these are known as the traction epiphyses, where strong tendons are attached onto the bones, okay, and these are not involved in the load transmission. Example are, this diagram is from femur, and this is called as greater trochanter. This is called very strong tendons of strong muscles are attached here, gluteal muscles, okay, abdominal muscle, iliacus and the pectineus. As you have seen in the upper limb, the humerus, greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle was there, and they were giving attachment to the strong muscle supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and to the lesser tubercle subclavius was attached. So they were all muscles which were strong, and they are pulling the bone, okay, and because of that there appears a secondary center for ossification, and these centers are the give rise to the epiphyses, which are called as the traction epiphyses, okay. I hope that these two types of the epiphyses, pressure and traction, which are shown in these diagrams, are clear. Now I move to the third kind of the epiphyses. Now this is the third kind of the epiphysis, called as the atavistic epiphyses. Some of the bones uh, uh, in phylogenetically lower animals were separate bones. That means if we see the lower animals, say for example bird, in case of the bird, the I mean to say the bone which is the coracoid bone and the bone which was of the pectoral region is scapula, they were two separate bones. But later when the evolution has progressed, okay, these bones, they came close to each other and they have united with each other. So in scapula, the coracoid process is the part of the scapula which was a separate bone, which has now come and fused to the scapula. So in higher animals, these bones which were separate in lower animals, due to the evolutionary development, they have come close to each other and fuse with some with each other, okay, with some other bones, okay, or with each other. Now example, I have told you the coracoid process of scapula, and it is another bone which in human being is the example, is the posterior tubercle of talus. When you will learn the talus, you will see that on the posterior aspect of the talus there is a bone called as osteogonum, which was a separate bone in the lower animal, but in human it has come close to talus and fuse with it. This kind of the epiphyses, okay, are separate bone which have fused with the other bone, okay. In the higher animals, say for example in human beings, these type of the epiphyses, they are called as the atomistic epiphyses, okay, they are called as. So these are the example of the three different types of the epiphyses. In first two, pressure and traction, I told you that they were because of the different kind of forces applied onto the bone, one at the ends and another at the site of the attachment of the strong tendon. And in the third kind of epiphysis, it indicates the evolutionary process, okay, because two bones were not needed in higher animals, so they have come to fuse with each other, okay. I think you have understood, okay, this aspect of the ossification or the bone formation, okay. Thank you very much.